problem solving, that ability to see the problem and solve the problem, right? It's a key for the best educators. And today we're talking to someone who models that level of practical intelligence as someone, and this is as much as anyone I've ever seen. If you ever wanted to do it, to just get there, to persistently get it done, today's guest is inspiring and her courage to do it. And she actually helps map out the pathway for anyone else to also be an overcomer. Oakland University professor, accomplished author, and developer of one of the most popular online courses in the world. It's my privilege to introduce you to Dr. Barbara Oakley as our guest. Next.
Welcome to the Educators Among Us podcast, where we share motivational messages and inspiring stories for and about educators. Your host, Scott Barron, is author of the critically acclaimed book, Love 'Em and Lead 'Em, and provides powerful insights and wisdom for those who heed the call to teach, coach, lead, and serve at all levels of education.
This is Scott Barron, and I'm honored to be your host for the Educators Among Us podcast, where we get to share great stories and insights and hopefully just a little bit of that extra encouragement that educators need as they're taking on the adventures of the work, because it comes with a lot of adventures. And in the United States, we're about to start a new school year and everybody's getting geared up, and there's a lot of excitement, a lot of trepidation, a lot of exhaustion, but the school year is relentless and we got to go. And so that's the reason why we created the Educators Among Us podcast, was just to hopefully give a little bit of an energetic push. Everybody needs it every now and then. And some people having that on a Monday morning, as we share our Monday morning encouragement and give some words of just inspiration, hopefully that will help encourage you in your work, regardless of your role there on the campus. And that could be a preschool, elementary school, middle school, high school, college, college and career, whatever your role is. As educators, you pour into the lives of others. You make such a massive difference, and we're so grateful for you and your contribution. So as we today, we've got a really special guest, and I actually discovered Dr. Barbara Oakley, on a podcast myself. I was listening to, I think it was a South by Southwest panel interview, and she was on there, and there was different people talking, and then all of a sudden there was this person speaking some truth and perspective that was so different. And I was like, wait a minute, time out. Who is this? And so I did the research and tracked her down, and then we've had some great conversations over the last few months, just learning about our backgrounds together and just exploring, thoughts and having great conversations. And so I wanted to share a little bit about Dr. Barbara Oakley with you, because she's got quite a story. I mean, Barbara, thank you for being here and being a part of this conversation.
Oh, it's my pleasure to be here, Scott.
Well, you've made an impact on so many educators and students and people around the world, and so I'm fascinated to learn a little bit more and have this conversation with you. But so Barb, as you introduce yourself on some of your videos and other things, Barb met her husband Philip while they were working together at the South Pole Station in Antarctica. I mean, this lady is quite the adventurer, an incredible sort of life story. She served in the U.S. Army. She was a translator on a fishing trawler out in the Bering Sea. She's been a professor at Oakland University now for many years, where her work focuses on the complex relationship between neuroscience and social behavior. She's a prolific writer. She's published at least 8 books and contributed to a lot of articles and other publications. She's the author of one of the most popular MOOCs in the world. That's a massive online open course. And her course with a few other authors, Learning How to Learn, powerful mental models to help you master tough subjects. That is the third most popular MOOC in the entire world. I mean, how cool is that, right? And then, of course, you can learn more about her at barbaraoakley.com. So Barb, thank you again for taking the time. And one of the first questions I have for you, this is one of the ones that we ask all the guests on the Educators Among Us podcast, is who is an educator that significantly impacted your life, right? We all have those people at different levels who really made a difference for us. And so we like to kind of share some of those background stories and for perspective. So who is an educator that significantly impacted your life and why?
Well, there's several educators who have really had an impact. But today, for some reason, Dr. Gil Wiedekind pops to mind. And he was my thermodynamics and fluids and so forth instructor, professor at Oakland University. And the reason I thought he was so extraordinary was that he had developed his own methods for helping us as students learn. And he'd been a fantastic professor at Oakland University for like 30 years. And the way he taught combined the very best of today's active and cooperative learning approaches with sort of some of the best aspects of traditional ways of learning that we've thrown away at our peril. Actually, some of those ways of learning are very, very good. So he would do things like he would make sure that about every 2 weeks we would have a quiz. So, and then he would add those quiz scores up, and we'd take a final, of course. But that avoided that idea of, we have a midterm and then we have a final and that's the way it goes, or maybe only just a final. He kept people from procrastinating. And his quizzes were often in two parts. Part of it, you had to memorize. You had to memorize things because he would ask simple questions, but it was this first part, you had to have those formulas in your head. Then the second part of his bigger quizzes, you could maybe look at a cheat sheet that you had developed. So he did make sure that you had some of those key ideas in your brain, but also he kind of gave you a little bit of an assist later on. But these kinds of approaches are where you're putting your learning, you're making sure your learners are not procrastinating, you're keeping up on things, you're having them memorize some aspects of what you're learning. But then, of course, he had wonderful stories about engineers and so forth. So he was the best of all teachers.
That's awesome.
And that's who
we know.
Was
that's interesting because storytelling.
It's like he's consciously developed these.
That's awesome. Yeah, storytelling often is articulated as a real impact element for highly effective educators. It's interesting that you would say that because it is something that comes up quite a bit as we ask that question about, highly impactful educators. They speak to the idea that they use stories, they use different narratives that really connected with their students. And it's a fascinating technique, I think, that does get underemphasized, but also your idea of, hey, there is an advantage to sort of that old school memorization and learning sort of the facts and then ingraining those into our memories. And I know you've done a lot of research on that we're going to explore some more today. So when and how did you first get started as an educator, right? Because you have been down a very unique path and have had such a wide variety of experiences. What kind of sparked in you to want to pursue this, education as a career?
Oh, I am totally the accidental educator. It was. I get very interested in things. And so I started out, my first degree was in Slavic languages and literature. And to my surprise, I began to discover that even though I had followed my passion, nobody was really very interested in hiring me to keep going with my passion of language learning. And so after I got out of the military, I changed course. I decided to try to see if I could get a degree in electrical engineering, which was about as distant as any discipline could possibly be from the kind of person I was. I was very language oriented, can't do math, and so forth. And so I took it slow and easy. Went to the university, took only 3 courses at a time. Normally it's 4 at that particular university. And I started with remedial high school algebra. So I started at the lowest possible level at math and slowly began climbing my way upwards. And through the first year was kind of a horror story in that I was always afraid that I would never be as good as those high school hotshots that were coming out here. I was 26 years old. I had just gotten out of the military, and I'd forgotten anything I had ever even learned, which wasn't much in high school about physics and math and things like that. But by slowly just continuing to move forward, studying hard, I was able to get my second degree in electrical engineering. And I kind of kept going from there, got my master's degree, and we had our children. And I started going to school, graduate school, part-time during that time. And then, I just thought, wow, why don't I go for a PhD? So I went for a doctorate, and right, because I was doing very well and also had experience by that time as an electrical engineering industry. But then when I was graduating with my doctorate, they told me, hey, wait a minute, there's a position open here. Someone is retiring. Why don't you apply for it? So I did, and by golly, I got the position. It's sort of like they had their chance to get rid of me, but instead they invited me on board. And suddenly I found myself teaching these classes about engineering, and I thought, wow, I am so afraid of what, I was nervous in front of people, but the very first class I ever taught, you probably couldn't do this today because of, concerns about how others might take this. But at the time, I thought this is the only time in my whole life that I can ever do this because no one knows who I am. So I walked into my very first class to teach, which was statics and dynamics, which I did horribly at when I had taken it some 20 years before. And I said, hello. My name is Barbara Oakley. I am not teaching English. I am teaching statics and dynamics. And I made like I was so nervous, which was super easy, that I forgot how to write my name in English. So I wrote my name in Cyrillic on the board. And I turned around and people, they're like already taking out their ad drop cards, this Russian lady doesn't know how to even speak English. And I started laughing and I said, I got you, didn't I? And the whole class just erupted with laughter. And I made so many mistakes in that first teaching class, but they forgave me. I mean, it's like if you use a little humor and so forth, they forgave me an
And
awful lot.
vulnerability
Yeah.
as well. That is fantastic. I love that. That's so cool. Well, so and that's one of the things that our audience knows. I love unique stories, and the fact that you changed careers, that you went into the profession. Sometimes you went into there was a lot of fear and trepidation. It wasn't like you had all your stuff together and could come in and wow your students. You're a learner. I mean, you're the like the poster child for lifelong learning and wanting to share that joy and that also some of the techniques, which is what you do through your books. And so I just love the fact that you've answered that call and that you have such a passion for it. It comes through and some of the ways that you express yourself and obviously I especially loved in your videos on how to learn the humor that you guys wrapped in and some of the animation and some of the other elements to it. It made it fun, right? It was highly engaging, and I've actually begun sharing that with some of our grandkids so that they could see and learn how to learn. And so I've just have been fascinated with your approach because you're a smart lady, but you also have a sense of humor. You tell stories, you mix in a lot of different pieces, and so really admire your approach. So
Well, I think I'm lucky that I have lots of stories.
wow, yeah, absolutely, and great one. So a question for you. So from your perspective, because you speak at conferences around the world, you get to see a lot of different education systems, but kind of in the U.S. particularly, from your perspective, what is the biggest challenge that needs to be solved kind of as soon as possible in U.S. schools? What do you see as the biggest challenges?
Oh, that's there's quite a few challenges. I think some of those challenges are being solved. There's a wonderful book called The Beautiful Tree, and this book is about sort of private approaches to helping people learn. In other words, things like charter schools, things like ways of getting outside the system where regulations can be good, but at the same time they can also be problematic. And so sometimes you want to have like the teacher, him or herself, themselves have perhaps the biggest impact on whether or not a child learns or wants to learn. So what that really means is you want to have the ability to ensure that your school has some of the best teachers, people who can be inspiring, even if they're not, always easy to learn from. So, but I should correct that a little bit, because one of the ways that I think schools in the US or in the Western world, one of their good features that could be even better, but they do it really well. They're at least getting on the pathway, is the use of metaphor and analogy in whatever you're teaching. And you may say, metaphors, what does that have to do with learning, really? I mean, maybe a little, but it's no big deal. Well, when I wrote the book, A Mind for Numbers, and that was like, I thought, I'd written all these books about sort of negative aspects of life, problematic people and so forth. I thought, I'm going to turn to education. I'm just going to write a little book and it's going to be very uplifting. I'm going to turn to educators because educators are all uplifting and so forth. And
that's that book, A Mind for Numbers, right? A Mind for Numbers,
that's the book,
right?
Mind for Numbers.
Yeah.
Right.
Yeah.
And in fact, it's kind of funny because that book, as an author, if you're publishing with a major publisher, you cannot select the title of your book. You can suggest a title, but they get to pick it. So they picked the title, A Mind for Numbers. Well, if you go and look on the, like I have a little pop-up thing from Google that just tells me when A Mind for Numbers comes up. It comes up pretty much every day in obituaries. It is the world's most boring title for a book. I mean, in my opinion. And I thought, oh man, how could they pick this title? And so, but to my shock, it is sold well over 1 million copies around the world. And people really like it. And part of it is, so I went to this website that people may know of called ratemyprofessors.com. And there's a way that you can go and download the names of the top 200 or 300 teachers, most highly evaluated professors of whatever the discipline is, whether it's English, psychology, engineering, or whatever. So I did. I downloaded about 15 different disciplines, ranging from the humanities all the way to the hard sciences. And I got thousands of names of top professors who in those particular disciplines. And then I hired someone to look up all their emails. And I emailed all of them. And I said, I wrote this manuscript for this book called A Mind for Numbers. And would you take a look at it, give me some feedback? You would be shocked at what a high percentage of people came back and said, sure, I'll be glad, please send me a copy. So they did. They looked at it. I got a lot of really nice insights and corrections and, all sorts of additional ideas. But, and that helped improve the book and its structure. But one thing that surprised me is that some of the really top professors, as in top 20 teaching professors on all of ratemyprofessors.com, came back and they said, I do this one little thing, but I don't tell other professors that I do this. But it is a big part of the magic of why I'm such a good teacher. And that magic was the use of metaphor and analogy. And why they didn't tell other teachers was that when the other professors, if they happened to mention that, metaphors and analogies were really helpful, they'd say, that's why you're considered such a good teacher, is because you make it so easy for your students. It's like, well, isn't that our job, to make things easier to understand, give them an onboarding way of learning? And so actually metaphor and analogy is something I teach about in Learning How to Learn, which is that most popular massive open online course. And interestingly, I just added a new video on metaphor and generative AI like ChatGPT and how to use it to help you. Because, for example, I was recently in Mongolia, and they were telling me, we have this problem. We get these students, they're right off the Mongolian steppe. They know about yurts, they know about herding. They have absolutely no clue about Python programming. And how am I going to teach them? I can't even reach them. I don't know anything about yurts and herding and so forth. So I was like, well, all you do is you go to ChatGPT or Claude. Claude's one of my favorite ones. That's from Anthropic. And you ask, what's a good metaphor to teach about this aspect of Python programming to Mongolian students who've just come off the steppe? And it will give you these great analogies and metaphors. I don't care what your students' backgrounds are, it will give you some fantastic teaching ideas.
Well, so that actually, obviously opens up a whole nother conversation, right? Is looking at how AI and virtual reality and these other tools are going to transform education, right? And both the teaching as well as the learning. What are you seeing there? I mean, you've just mentioned a very powerful way, even with the current generation of AI, which we all know that's going to rapidly, emerge over the next few months and years, and so what are you seeing? I mean, what are some of the ways that education leaders should be seeking to kind of evaluate and even employ some of this emerging technology into their schools as well as into their classrooms?
Here's the challenge. We as professors and as teachers suddenly got the rug pulled out from under us, and almost all of the methods that we use, or many of the methods we use to help students learn on their own, like going off and writing an essay, are suddenly not, we can't put that as an assignment anymore. And students can go look up homework answers for even advanced problems and so forth. And so for teachers and educators of all kinds, it's so disconcerting to have something like this happen that your first reaction can be, no, I don't like this stuff. I don't like ChatGPT. It helps students cheat. It's a bad thing. I don't want anything to do with it. And yeah, and it's understandable why that takes place. But let me tell a little story about when writing first took place. So we're talking making imprints in with cuneiform in a clay tablet. The people were horrified because what's going to happen here? People are going to stop learning and using their memory, and they'll stop developing their memory, which is something that is really valuable in a community, to have memory of the past, of your culture, of your family, of where wild berries can be found, all sorts of things. There's a reason we have memories and why we use them, and it actually really does help if you practice and develop your memory. But so people were absolutely horrified at the negative consequences of learning to write. And pretty much any technological breakthrough is going to have advantages and disadvantages. Whether we like it or not, generative AI is sweeping in like a wave, and it does provide so many, so much help. I mean, if you want to make a lesson plan, input all your materials, even if it's just like photographs of your notes, and say, please devise a lesson plan for me. And there's really good apps that can help you to generate lesson plans and so forth. There's so many ways that it can help us, that as educators, that we might as well start learning how to use it. And we still have to figure out how to get around the problem that it's hard to evaluate our students. But that will come, and we will change, we will learn, and perhaps you can be some of the solution to these issues that have come along with the good aspects of generative AI.
Yeah, that's one of the challenges, of course, that we're seeing is education leaders have responsibility now for shepherding educators through a period of life that is going to be unusually disruptive. I mean, we're entering into a phase where almost every aspect of education is going to be up for reconsideration, whether it's the instructional model, the business model, the operational model, everything, right? And it's a period of time that we're coming into that is extraordinarily disruptive. And the fascinating thing, of course, about educators is they typically are not inclined towards change and disruption. That's just not, a lot of them went into education because they did not like that pace of life. And so unfortunately now it's inevitable, and it's something that's going to be uncomfortable. But, we always talk about a growth mindset, and hey, welcome to the party, because this is where you're going to have to bring that every day, is that growth mindset that says, hey, we can do this. We can adapt. We can figure it out. And it's going to be a lot of technology, again, a lot of technique, a lot of different approaches that, it's going to shift the role probably a lot for a lot of educators and professors, teachers, coaches, etc. But we get to adapt. We get to figure out new ways, and so I'm sure there's a lot of metaphors that we're going to be using to explain that even to educators, right? So that will be fun. Hey, in your program, in your book, in your videos, you talk about the way the brain works, and you obviously have a particular interest. You've done a lot of research around this, and you've explained that in some basic ways that makes it approachable. Again, the metaphors that you use even in your videos, like, for example, when you're explaining the focus and diffusion and the way the brain processes new information and things. What was some of the inspiration for that approach and that thinking, and how have you seen that impact students?
So for me, I was very lucky in that right out of high school, because I thought I couldn't do math or science at all, I thought, well, I can do language. I'd like to learn another language really well. And of course, I couldn't afford to go to college. I couldn't afford to, go overseas and study. But I found out there was one way to learn a language and get paid for it, and that was to join the Army. So that's what I did right out of high school, and I was sent to the Defense Language Institute. Now, more or less at random, I just thought, I want to learn a language that's from a big country that isn't so different like Chinese that you could study it for decades as an adult, and it could still be difficult to acquire a sort of anything nearing native fluency. So I thought, what's a language that's close enough but not too close to English? And I settled on Russian. And mostly because I had a high school teacher who, for whatever reason, they taught Russian for a little while at this high school. And so I took that along with some other classes, French and Spanish and so forth, and German. And it was an amazing experience to go to the Defense Language Institute, because it's one of the world's best institutions of language learning. So I learned how to learn a language through the techniques that they inculcated and foisted upon us. And a lot of that was retrieval practice. So you're trying to not just look at a page and memorize vocabulary words by looking at the page, looking at the answer, and thinking you know it. You have to retrieve the answer, what is that vocabulary word, from your own memory. And so it taught me to use retrieval practice, even though that's not what it was called, or, they didn't really know that was what back in the 1970s. So, but I wondered, so when I decided to shift 10 years later, a decade, to start trying to study math and science, I thought, well, the one thing that worked for me was learning the way I learned at the Defense Language Institute. That's what I'm going to try when I'm learning math and science, which I had not tried at all when I was in high school. At high school, I was just like, I blew it all off. I was like, come on, see if you can teach me. And of course, they couldn't. But when I started to try and use some of these techniques, see if I could retrieve some of the key ideas of what was being taught in, for example, in the introductory physics course, and practice with them so they came easily to mind. And then when I was faced with a novel problem, I had worked so many problems and really practiced with them so that the hard ones were embedded within me, that I could look at a new equation or a new problem and say, I know what that is. And I could remember and how to solve that problem would unfold just as with singing a song unfolds naturally and intuitively in your mind. You don't need to think about it. It just unfolds for you. So it was this. So then I began wondering over the decades, especially when I was teaching, why did that language learning approach work with STEM? What's going on in the brain that helped it, that was the same kind of thing? And then I stumbled across, finally, there's a neuroscientist at George Washington University called Michael Ullman, and he is doing work on the sort of automatic systems that it goes through the basal ganglia into long-term memory. That's how you form your links, or that more declarative hippocampal pathway of learning. So you have basically a way of laying, if you practice a whole bunch, you lay these neural connections that become intuitive. They're actually in a different part of your brain. And if you're just thinking and working your way through, you can create sets of links, neural links. You've got the memory, but it's not that, whoa, it's intuitive. It jumps to mind. And you need both types of links in order to be able to be quick and intuitive and a good learner. If like one of my good friends who I just adore, and he would tell me, memorization, that's bad. You don't need to do it. And he had a doctorate from Princeton in chemical engineering. So he, clearly knew what he was talking about, but he was like, it's so bad to teach students to memorize. And then finally, I mentioned to him, the reason you tell people they don't need to memorize is because his memory was so good that at Princeton, his fraternity used to send him in to take a test, and he would come back out and he would write the entire test and all the answers down, and that would go on file in the fraternity. And he's saying you don't need to memorize because he didn't need to memorize. It automatically, his memory was so retentive, and he simply couldn't understand how normal people like me, without this kind of preternaturally good memory, do need to practice bringing things to mind and remembering.
Very interesting. Yeah, it's one of those things where we sometimes, as they say, throw out the baby with the bathwater, right? We lose some important techniques by trying to kind of latch on to some of the new and better, and sometimes there is an advantage in some of the good old ways, right? So it's a tenuous balance, and we run up against that in all types of instructional models and methods. But yeah, we're going to have to rethink the idea of, sometimes even direct instruction is viewed as a a negative, and there's benefit to that as well, along with blended learning and differentiated instruction, and there's a lot of different techniques, and of course being able to adapt to where the learners are. That's a key advantage that I've seen from the best educators, is they adapt their style to where their students are. They're very sensitive and aware of where their students are. And you do a fantastic job of that. Your stories are so fascinating, Barb, because you are such a problem solver. I mean, throughout your life, you've run up against barriers and you figured it out. I mean, you haven't allowed that to be a point at which you then have to stop. You just figure out a way through it, around it, over it, under it, whatever. And that's been an interesting thing that has emerged as a pattern for the most effective educators, is they have that practical intelligence. And that's what you have in a large spoonful is an ability to see the problem and then solve the problem. And whether it's learning new things, finding ways through barriers, even barriers of prejudice and other things, you have figured it out in ways that are fascinating. And I love hearing some of your narratives. One of the things I have a question for you on, obviously you are very humble, but among your many successes, of what achievement are you most proud? Because you've got a lot, but of what would you say, yeah, that's the thing that I think I feel the most pride about?
I think that education is a little bit like a gigantic ocean-going vessel. Gigantic. And to move it a little bit, to swerve it a little bit, takes enormous energy. And my hope is that through these massive open online courses, which really have reached millions, that it's helping to kind of turn the boat a little bit to help reseat education on a more research-based approach. And I'm not working alone. I mean, a lot of my work is based on the fantastic work of wonderful researchers like Bob Bjork, Jeff Karpicki, many who have worked for many decades to help turn that boat as well. But if anything, I think what I can do is really help bring to life some of these important research findings so they're digestible and interesting and visually appealing, and they stick in your mind. So I hope that might be part of what I have done in helping to reinforce the fantastic work of these great educators and kind of bring in as well that value of neuroscience itself.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, and I love that, the fact that you've taken some pretty complex concepts and made them approachable as well as applicable. And I think that's a beautiful part of educators, is that ability. And most of the time, it's not new stuff. It's knowing how to connect the dots, but also knowing how to make it practical, and then giving it a simplicity that enables others to learn it and then use it. And it's just a beautiful thing. I love that. So, listen, if out there in our audience, if you have curiosity, if this has piqued some of your curiosity, check out on Amazon. You can see a lot of Barb's books. You can see it at barbaraoakley.com and see a lot of this fascinating research that they're doing there. And she's a collaborator, obviously, and I love the way that you work with different people and find ways to combine thinking as well as techniques and presentation. And you are not only combining knowledge, but you're actually using it, right? You're actually applying it in your teaching techniques and making it free. It's free. It's a beautiful way that you have done that. So thank you for what you do, Barb. I just admire you as an educator and your commitment to be a learner, the way that you figure out ways to get where you want to go as a problem solver. Just so greatly admire that and appreciate what you do. So hey, all of you out there, if you've ever wanted to go do it, if you've ever thought about trying to go learn that or get that degree or just get that knowledge, follow Barb. She's laid the footsteps. You can do it. If there's anybody who you can say, just do it. This is your lady right here. This is better than Michael Jordan, right? Just do it, right? And it's a cool encouragement, hopefully for many of you out there that even though there may be some barriers in front of you, there's always a way through. And just keep at it. Don't give up on the dream.
If there's one thing I can add is if you feel really uncomfortable and you feel like a fake, you're an imposter and you couldn't possibly do this, welcome to the club. That's how I feel every time. And you just kind of keep going through it, no matters. And if you feel really uncomfortable like an imposter, that helps you be better because it helps you change. Do the hard work of changing. Whereas that cocky person that's like, oh yeah, I can do this, they are less willing oftentimes to change. So just keep that in mind. If you feel uncomfortable, that's okay.
Well, Barb, I'm looking forward to continuing our conversations together because you spark a lot of inspiration for me and just really respect you in what you're doing there, both at Oakland as well as what you're doing throughout the world and your influence and your platform of trying to inspire better learning and better teaching. So, hey, if you're a student and you want to understand how the brain works and maybe improve your ability to learn any subject, check out Barb's stuff. If you're a teacher, also, and want to figure out how to use different styles and techniques to reach students where they are and really provide a more brain research driven approach to your teaching methods. That's also, so whenever you say brain research, it automatically triggers, that's got to be complicated. But this is actually broken down in very applicable ways, regardless of your background. So check it out. And so thank you, Barb, again, for your commitment as an educator, and all of you out there, thank you for what you do as educators and changing lives, because educators, the impact lasts for years, for decades, for generations. And so we're very thankful for your commitment to that work, and don't give up. This is a noble calling. So keep up the faith, right? This is Scott Barron. Remember, love them and lead them.
Thank you for joining us for the Educators Among Us podcast and for your courageous commitment to this noble calling. We get you and the challenges of this work. To stay connected with this community, be sure to subscribe to our podcast and weekly encouragement at educatorsamongus.com.